You might not expect an owl to take in a kitten, but life in Vallmere has a way of surprising you. The sky was still gray when I first saw her, Thimble, just a tiny creature, no bigger than my hand, shivering and wet beneath the fence of Maera's enclosure. She seemed to have pushed her way through the bushes, maybe drawn by warmth or just by chance. I've cared for many animals, but none ever seemed to need a mother like this one. None ever looked directly at a predator with such trust. None ever made me feel so unsure. That afternoon, I had not planned to be home. A storm had knocked out power in the village, so I came back early to check the heat lamps in Maera's enclosure. That's when I found her, this small, trembling bit of life curled up next to the aviary fence, her ribs visible through her damp orange fur. For a brief moment, I thought she might be gone. But then she lifted her head, blinked those big, round eyes at me, and mewed softly but firmly. It was as if she was saying, "I'm staying." Maera had been perched silently, her usual unreadable gaze fixed on the scene. Just as I was about to scoop Thimble up, Maera shifted. She didn't act out of aggression or fear. She simply moved closer, almost as if to protect the little kitten. I knew I should have kept them apart. Thimble was just a stray kitten, and Maera was a raptor. It didn't seem safe. But something held me back. Maera wasn't flaring her feathers or spreading her wings like she typically did when something unfamiliar came too close. Instead, she leaned in, curious and calm. I took Thimble inside, wrapped her in a towel, and started giving her warm fluids. Her little body was so cold, but despite her weakness, she kept trying to squirm towards the glass door, as if she sensed Maera was still out there watching. By nightfall, I had settled Thimble in a shoebox next to the radiator, thinking that would be the end of it. The next morning, though, the shoebox was empty, and the back door unlatched. The house felt eerily quiet that morning, but it was a different kind of quiet, sharp and unsettling, as if something had changed while I slept. I remember standing barefoot on the old floorboards, staring at the empty shoebox while the kettle whistled in the background, its sound cutting through the fog in my mind. The towel was still there, crumpled and warm, but Thimble was gone. As I moved through the cottage, I relied more on my instincts than on careful reasoning. It was only when I stepped outside into the soft light of the back garden that I spotted her, curled up peacefully at the base of Maera's enclosure, nestled just inside the open gate I thought I had locked. But there she was, completely at ease and safe, lying in a quiet spot beneath the perch, as if it were perfectly natural for a little kitten to take a nap there. Maera, the owl, remained still in the dim light. She didn't lunge or even fluff her feathers when I opened the gate and walked closer. Her large amber eyes were fixed on me, but not in the way owls typically do, sizing up their potential prey or simply ignoring irrelevant noise. This gaze felt different, heavy, purposeful, and steady. As I crouched down to scoop Thimble into my arms, Maera tilted her head in that slow, deliberate manner unique to owls. In that moment, it seemed she was not hostile, nor indifferent. It felt more like she was allowing, maybe even recognizing, what was happening. The change in Maera began gradually, so subtle at first that I thought I might be imagining it. Where she once sat for hours without moving, she started to pace around the edges of her enclosure. It wasn't restless energy. She was alert, tuned into something beyond my perception. Interestingly, her hunting habits shifted as well. She no longer pursued her mice with the same accuracy, often leaving them untouched while Thimble nestled closer to her perch each day. I found myself balancing my instincts with what I knew to be proper protocol, unsure if I was witnessing a breaking of nature's boundaries or the emergence of something rare and precious. It was Sia, one of my volunteers, who first noticed something amiss, the slight limp in Maera's gait and the tremor in her left wing. I tried to convince myself it was just the cold, or perhaps the natural decline that comes with age. But when Jonah came by with his mobile veterinary kit, he confirmed what I had been reluctant to acknowledge. The healed wing we believed was stable was starting to deteriorate. The scar tissue was thickening and compressing the nerves. Maera was in pain, and there was a real possibility that her entire left wing could lose its function if she didn't undergo surgery. The news hit me harder than I anticipated. I had always understood that Maera wouldn't return to the wild, yet I had created a dignified life for her here. where she ruled like a solitary queen. The prospect of surgery brought with it a new layer of stress and confinement, along with the risk of needing to relocate her permanently to a sanctuary if her condition worsened. While we discussed options, Thimble gently nudged her tiny head against the curve of Maera's talons, blissfully unaware of the fragility of the moment. I kept thinking about Maera's eyes. It wasn't just how they looked, it was the way they seemed to ask something important. After working with animals for years, I'd learned to recognize pain, even when it was hidden behind a calm exterior. But this felt different, deeper. She was quieter now, moving more slowly, yet she never pushed Thimble away. The kitten curled up against her breast feathers, purring softly as if the sound was a secret shared only with the twilight. Still, a sense of unease lingered in my mind. What if her body was failing even while she seemed so serene? Sia saw things differently. She believed in a fairy tale. She started drawing the two of them, Maera, the strong protector, and Thimble, the delicate miracle. For her, this wasn't simply about rescue, it was about fate. When I brought up the idea of surgery, she tensed up, her eyes showing an emotion I didn't often see: defiance. "You'd separate them now?" she questioned, as if I had shattered something sacred just by suggesting it. Later that evening, Elsie came by with herbal salves and questions I wasn't prepared to answer. She spoke of old tales about forest owls that cared for orphaned creatures in times of imbalance, a natural way of healing between species. I found it hard to laugh, yet when she peered through the mesh and whispered, "Maybe she chose her," I remained silent. Then there was Jonah, always the practical one, who cautioned me that bonding between different species wasn't natural or stable. "You're seeing what you want to see, Cal," he told me, "but it's just an owl and just a kitten." But my confidence began to waver. News travels fast in a small town like Vallmere. It started with quiet whispers in the bakery and subtle glances at the co-op. Before long, curiosity drew people in. At first, it was just a handful of townsfolk who had heard about the owl that had taken in a kitten. They gathered outside my fence, eyes wide with wonder, snapping photos on their phones as if the moment was something sacred. Each step they took beyond that gate felt like a crack in the safe little world I had built. Then, Ronan Bell from Animal Control arrived, clipboard in hand and a firm handshake. He spoke about policies with a seriousness that felt almost like scripture. His concern was thoughtful, but also cold. "Cross-species bonding is unstable, Callum. You can't monitor them forever. The owl's wild, the kitten's not. This could lead to problems." He left a notice on my shed door, stating that my license review was officially pending, effective immediately. Around the same time, I couldn't ignore Maera's decline any longer. She had completely stopped eating, and while she remained calm when Thimble nestled in her feathers, it was clear that her health was fading. Thimble, unaware of the gravity of the situation, began to imitate her, climbing the lower branches of Maera's perch, blinking slowly with her head tilted, as if she belonged there with her. That evening, I stood by the edge of the enclosure, feeling torn between what seemed like love and a sense of inevitability. I wondered if I truly had the right to decide which feeling mattered more. I found myself observing them more than attending to my duties. It felt less like caretaking and more like grappling with a question that offered no clear answer. Every instinct I had developed through years of rescue work urged me to act. I thought about keeping Thimble inside, preparing Maera for relocation, and protecting what I could before everything fell apart. But every time I opened that gate, Maera would move just enough to acknowledge my presence, not as a threat or even a caregiver, but as someone outside their bond. Meanwhile, Thimble had stopped meowing altogether. She no longer cried for food or for me. The only moment of resistance came when I tried to gather her indoors. She dug her claws into the soft earth beneath Maera's perch, an action that was quiet yet filled with a desperation that nearly broke my heart. I realized I was approaching a decision point. Surgery for Maera could not be delayed, but taking her would also mean separating her from Thimble. I worried that doing so might unravel the fragile strength that Maera had left. Yet keeping them together also meant confronting something beyond my understanding and control, along with the possibility that I couldn't safeguard them from harm. That night, I stood at the door, lights off, just listening, and through the wind I heard a purr, soft and steady, layered beneath the gentle rustle of feathers. The first feathers were discovered at the edge of the woods, small, white-tipped, scattered in a half-moon shape near the ravine where foxes roam. I knew they didn't belong to Maera, as she never ventured outside her enclosure. Still, their presence filled me with a weight I was unable to articulate. The second sign arrived soon after, scratch marks on the aviary fence, low to the ground, yet deep and fresh. This was not the idle curiosity of a raccoon. It felt like something was testing boundaries, searching for a way in. That same night, I decided to set up the trail cam. The next morning brought a surprising sight, a young badger, bold and curious, circling the enclosure at dusk and poking at the mesh with its paws. Inside, Thimble had been with Maera the whole time. At first, I chose not to mention it to Sia. I didn't want to upset her or, even worse, spark her determination to take action. But she discovered the footage on my laptop and sat staring at it in silence for several minutes. Finally, she broke the quiet, asking softly, "They're not safe here anymore, are they?" I didn't have a response. Later that evening, I received a call from the vet confirming Maera's surgery date, just 4 days away. Ronan left another voicemail, this time with a sharper tone. "You're creating an unstable situation," he said. "If anything happens, it's your responsibility, Callum." That night, I stayed in the enclosure with Maera and Thimble. Sleep eluded me as I simply watched them. The moonlight illuminated Maera's slow, blinking eyes, while Thimble curled up under her wing, entirely trusting and vulnerable. It dawned on me, I was the only one unsure of what to do next. I made the choice to leave the enclosure gate unlatched at night. It wasn't carelessness, it was a deliberate decision. I started to realize that I didn't truly believe I was keeping Maera and Thimble safe anymore. In many ways, I saw that they were the ones supporting each other. Maera had stopped eating altogether unless Thimble was close by. The little kitten would nudge a quail egg or tap at it until Maera acknowledged it, half-heartedly taking a bite as if she were doing it for Thimble's sake, not her own. Sia began visiting daily after school, her chatter replaced by a more somber, focused presence. She brought sketchbooks filled with stunning images that took my breath away. Drawings of Thimble standing watch beneath Maera's wings, the owl gazing at the stars with a heavy heart. One evening, Sia said quietly, "She's fading, but she's not afraid. Maybe it's because she knows she won't be alone." Elsie returned with an unexpected story. She shared a tale from the Highlands about an owl and a fox cub, both orphaned, who survived together through a fierce blizzard. "Sometimes the forest arranges things when it wants something to survive," she explained, "even if others don't see it that way." And then there was Jonah. He softened after observing Maera and Thimble together one evening. He quietly suggested, "Do you think maybe their bond is what's keeping her alive?" I didn't respond, but I felt no need to. That evening, as the wind picked up and the frost threatened to cover the ground, I moved Thimble's blanket closer to where Maera was perched. For the first time, Maera reached down, not with her beak or a cautious warning, but with one outstretched, feathered wing, gently pulling the kitten beneath it. 3 days before the surgery, Ronan came back to the shelter, but this time it was with paperwork instead of warnings. The board had reviewed the situation and informed me that if I didn't move Maera to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center by the end of the week, I risked losing my license. They mentioned public safety, emotional interference, and animal welfare policies. I listened quietly, feeling the notice tremble slightly in my hand. What troubled me most wasn't the message itself. It was clear that there was no acknowledgement of the bond forming between those two creatures. After Ronan left, I walked to the enclosure, still clutching the paper in my fist. Maera stood where she usually did, her head low, feathers slightly puffed. I noticed that Thimble had started mimicking Maera, stretching her back, turning her head slowly, blinking in time with the owl above her. I watched them for a long time, longer than I intended, trying to understand what part of all this was within my control. Later that evening, I called Jonah. I asked if there was any chance we could perform the surgery on site. He paused before responding, "It's risky, but I'll ask the board." Sia was upset when I explained the relocation order. She sat on the porch for hours, hugging her knees in silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but firm. If you send them away, they'll break. I had the urge to tell her that I didn't have a choice, but deep down, I knew that was a lie. I did have choices. I just wasn't sure I could live with either option. The house felt unusually quiet the night before I needed to make my final decision. It was the kind of silence that felt loaded, as if the walls were listening intently. At the kitchen table with Jonah, we spread out blueprints for a makeshift surgical space. He explained that we could proceed here, but it would be extremely challenging. The risks were enormous: anesthesia in a non-sterile environment, no backup staff, and, most concerning of all, if something went wrong, we wouldn't have room for mistakes. If she wakes confused or panicked, he added, she might lash out. And the kitten. I didn't let him finish. I understood exactly what he was implying. If Maera were to forget Thimble, or worse, turn against her, the situation could lead to disaster. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a matter of raw instincts and potential tragedy. Sia was standing in the doorway, arms crossed and eyes filled with determination. I'll stay with her during the surgery. I'll hold Thimble. She knows me now. Her resolve was evident, and even when Jonah began to object, I raised my hand to stop him. Sia had made up her mind. Once Jonah had left, I ventured into the enclosure one last time before the morning sun would force us into action. Maera sat on her perch, her feathers fluffed up, breathing slowly. Below her, Thimble slept, nestled in Maera's shadow. When I approached, Maera met my gaze, not with fear, but with a softer look that felt like permission, maybe even trust. So I leaned in and whispered, "Tomorrow, we'll try, but only if you're ready." She stayed still. However, in the gentle breeze, I could almost hear her breathe out, as if she already understood our choice. As dawn broke, the world emerged from a veil of silver mist, the forest still waking, branches and leaves seemingly holding their breath. Inside the makeshift surgical tent we set up in the barn, tension filled the air. Jonah moved with quiet focus, checking the monitors and preparing the anesthesia drip. Sia, seated on a stool against the wall, held Thimble close, her small body vibrating with a nervous purring. We had agreed she shouldn't be near the table, yet she refused to leave the room. "She needs to hear us," she insisted, her voice carrying an emotion I didn't want to name. Maera appeared calm, perhaps too calm. She allowed me to lift her without any struggle. Her weight felt heavier in my arms than it had weeks ago. I laid her down gently and spoke softly as Jonah placed the mask over her beak. Maera blinked slowly, taking in her surroundings, and then the surgery began. For 47 minutes, my world narrowed down to the sounds of rustling gloves, the quiet hiss of breaths through masks, and the beeping of a heart monitor, a device not designed for birds. I watched Maera's chest rise and fall, bracing myself for any indication that something could go wrong. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the barn's wooden frame. Sia kept whispering to Thimble, repeating, "She's coming back, she's coming back, she's coming back." But then, 34 minutes into the procedure, Maera stopped breathing. Just like that, she was still. "Callum," Jonah's voice broke through the silence. We acted quickly. We injected, stimulated, and cleared her airway. What felt like seconds stretched into what seemed like hours. Everything around us faded. Then, in an instant, her chest began to rise again. Shallow, but it was a sign of life. Not safety, not yet. But it was also not the end. Callum knelt in the dim light of the barn, his breath catching as he pulled back his trembling hands from Maera's still form. Maera was covered with a crumpled blanket on the table where moments ago her heart had struggled. Outside, dawn broke over the Scottish Highlands, sending gentle rays through the open door. These rays danced on Maera's speckled feathers, illuminating them with gold. In that quiet space, even the wind seemed to pause. Thimble, the little kitten, moved closer, his eyes wide and shiny. He pressed himself against Maera's side, hopeful. Sia sat back on her heels, a bloodied swab still clutched in her hand, watching through tears. Her fingers trembled against her lips as she silently willed the owl to breathe. Callum felt a tightness in his throat. He leaned forward, resting a shaky hand on Thimble's back as the kitten burrowed into Maera's soft chest. For a moment, everything was still. Then there was a twitch. Maera's talons curled slightly, and the monitor began to beep, signaling a fragile heartbeat. Callum let out a laugh that quickly turned into a sob, filled with disbelief. Maera's eyelids flickered open, revealing a hint of amber in her gaze. A weak, questioning hoot slipped from her, more of a whisper carried by the breeze. Thimble responded with a soft purr, nudging under her outstretched wing. Gathering her remaining strength, Maera shifted her great wing to cradle the trembling kitten against her. Sia took a deep breath and smiled, albeit shakily, placing one hand over her heart. Callum bowed his head, tears streaming down his face as relief and amazement washed over him. In that quiet moment, dust motes floated in the first light, weaving an unexpected family together. Maera was alive, though still fragile, and Thimble looked up at her as if witnessing a dream come true. The future was uncertain, but for now, hope hung in the air, warm and comforting. Beneath Maera's gentle rise and fall, Thimble discovered the solace of a mother's love. In the days that followed, the house felt different. It wasn't louder, not really, but the atmosphere had changed. It was softer, as if something unseen had settled into the very walls. Maera remained weak, often resting with her head tucked beneath her wing, but she was starting to eat again, slowly. Thimble was never far from her side. The kitten curled into the folds of Maera's feathers, his small body rising and falling in time with her shallow breaths, like waves brushing against the shore. I had never witnessed a connection quite like this, even after years spent working with wildlife and observing nature's wonders. Each afternoon after school, Sia would arrive, still sketching, but her approach had shifted. Her drawings transformed from whimsical fairy tales into something more profound. Portraits reflecting wariness, hope, and the unique, tender bond evident in Maera's exhausted gaze and Thimble's unwavering commitment. Jonah came around less often, but when he did, he would stand quietly near the enclosure, simply observing without saying a word. The question of how much time Maera had left was uncertain. It could be months, or even less, but what was clear was that however much time remained, it would be spent like this. Wings gently extended, a kitten snugly nestled beside her, no barriers between them. Sometimes it makes me think, did we see something out of the ordinary, or were we simply witnessing nature at its most remarkable? Perhaps Maera wasn't initially destined to be a mother. Perhaps she made that choice herself. And Thimble, in her fragile determination, had bravely sought it out. If this scenario resonates with you, even in a small way, take a moment to reflect on it. It serves as a reminder that love can manifest in unexpected forms, through the soft rustle of feathers, the gentle sound of a kitten at the edge of an enclosure, or decisions based not on reason, but on a deeper instinct. We may never completely grasp the dynamics between Thimble and Maera, but perhaps that isn't the essential part. The mere fact that it occurred is enough. If you've ever believed that connections can transcend barriers, that healing can take on strange shapes, and trust can exist between those typically seen as opposites, you're a part of this story too. We will continue to share these moments, these miraculous rescues and quiet wonders. If you're interested in following our journey further, consider subscribing to the channel. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think you would have done in Callum's position? And if you know someone who might need a reminder of hope, feel free to share this story with them. Sometimes it only requires courage to ask and grace to respond.